Zoe had always trusted her sister, Emily. They grew up together in the same house, shared the same childhood memories, and supported each other through every step of life. But when their father passed away unexpectedly, Zoe's world came crashing down in ways she never saw coming. As she sat in the lawyer's office, she was handed a will that wasn't even close to what she expected. Her father, a man who always talked about fairness and justice, had left everything to Emily. Zoe, who had been by his side through his last days, found herself with nothing. At first, it didn't make sense. Zoe had spent hours at her father's bedside, managing his care, making sure he was comfortable, while Emily, despite being the younger sibling, lived her life as if nothing had changed. Yet here she was, being told by the lawyer that the will left Zoe with nothing and everything to Emily. Zoe's heart sank, not just because of the inheritance, but because of how easily Emily had seemed to erase her role in their father's life. She knew there had been tension over the years. Emily always thought their father favored Zoe, that she was the better daughter in their eyes. But Zoe had never expected this kind of betrayal. She had never imagined Emily would go so far. The will wasn't just unfair, it felt wrong in every sense. Zoe couldn't believe it. How could Emily do this? It wasn't like their father to make such a decision without consulting anyone. He always valued family, always said that what they had together couldn't be bought or sold. But now, it was as if he had chosen to forget all of that. For the next few days, Zoe couldn't think of anything else. She went through every detail, trying to understand how this had happened. It didn't take long before she started noticing things that seemed off. Emily had been acting strangely around their father's assets in the months leading up to his death. She had been overly protective of the documents, and when Zoe asked to see certain things, Emily always brushed her off. There was always an excuse. "It's in the lawyer's hands now," she would say. But Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She decided to take matters into her own hands. Zoe knew Emily too well. If there was one thing she could count on, it was that her sister would slip up. And when she did, Zoe would be ready. After a few weeks of investigating, Zoe found something that made her blood run cold. It was a copy of the will Emily had shown the lawyer, but there was a small detail Zoe hadn't noticed before. The date on the document was just a few weeks before their father's death, a time when he could barely remember his own name. It was clear to Zoe. Emily had forged their father's will. The will that had been presented to the lawyer didn't look like something their father would have written. Zoe had never been the type to jump to conclusions, but this was too big to ignore. She started gathering evidence, making copies of documents, and consulting with a lawyer who could help her get to the truth. Zoe's suspicions were confirmed when Emily, in an unguarded moment, slipped and mentioned something about their father's wishes. The way she said it, with too much confidence, made Zoe's stomach churn. Emily had been planning this for months, carefully setting up her story to make sure Zoe wouldn't stand in the way. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about control. It was about power. Zoe knew she had to act fast. She couldn't let Emily get away with this. Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew. Zoe wasn't just fighting her sister for what she was owed. She was fighting for the truth. As Zoe prepared to take Emily to court, she received a message that would change everything. It wasn't from Emily, but from the lawyer. He had found something that would prove Zoe's claims, a DNA test. At first, Zoe thought it was a mistake, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized how this could work in her favor. If the test proved that her father's bloodline wasn't what Emily had claimed, then everything would unravel. Zoe made the decision to go ahead with the test, even though it meant everything could come crashing down. She had no idea what the results would show, but she couldn't back down now. The day the test results came in was the day everything changed. The results weren't what anyone expected. The truth was staggering. Zoe wasn't just the rightful heir to her father's estate. She was the true heir, in a way no one had anticipated. The test revealed that Emily wasn't their father's biological daughter. She had been adopted when she was younger, a secret their father had kept hidden for years. Zoe had always thought something was off, but she never could have imagined this. Emily had been living a lie, believing she had a claim to everything. But now, Zoe held the power, and everything Emily had done to steal what was rightfully hers was about to come crashing down. Zoe couldn't believe it at first. The feeling of relief was mixed with disbelief. It was a twisted kind of justice, but it was justice nonetheless. Emily's whole plan had been based on a lie, and now Zoe could prove it. But Zoe wasn't interested in getting revenge or watching her sister crumble. No, she simply wanted what was rightfully hers. She wanted to honor her father's memory, and she wanted to make sure Emily understood that no one could steal from her without consequences. The next few weeks were a blur as Zoe prepared for the final confrontation. Emily, desperate and cornered, tried to explain her actions, but it was too late. The truth was out, and Zoe had everything she needed to win. The courtroom became a battlefield, but this time, Zoe wasn't the one who was broken. She stood strong, fighting not just for her inheritance, but for her dignity, her family, and everything that had been taken from her. In the end, Zoe won. Not just the assets, but the understanding that sometimes the truth doesn't just set you free. It destroys everything built on lies. And as Zoe walked away from the courthouse, the weight lifted off her shoulders. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone anymore. She had done it all on her own. As the days passed, Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that everything around her was spinning out of control. Her mind raced with the thought of Emily's betrayal, but more than that, she couldn't stop thinking about their father. He had always been the one to teach her about integrity, loyalty, and fairness. He had worked so hard for what little they had, and yet here was Emily, who had forged his will for personal gain. Zoe felt like her entire world had been shattered, not just by the loss of her father, but by the realization that someone she had trusted her entire life could do something so cruel. Zoe tried to stay composed, but it was hard. Every time she saw Emily, she was reminded of the years they had spent together, of how they used to share everything, from childhood secrets to dreams about the future. How had it all changed? Zoe couldn't understand how Emily had justified this in her mind. Did she really believe their father wouldn't notice? That no one would figure it out? Zoe had always been the careful one, the one who paid attention to the details, and now that was the one thing that was going to save her. Zoe couldn't just sit back and let Emily get away with this. She wasn't sure how to even begin, but she knew that she couldn't let her sister win. She had to find proof. She spent hours going through old family photos, receipts, and records, hoping for something, anything, that would confirm her suspicions. It wasn't long before she came across a document that caught her eye. It was an old letter from the family lawyer, dated back to when their father had first written his will. The language was so much like their father's, so personal and genuine. But the will Emily had presented was different. It felt cold, detached, almost as if it were written by someone else entirely. Zoe's heart pounded as she compared the signatures. The handwriting, the tone, everything about the forged will screamed fake. But Emily was smart, and Zoe knew she would have covered her tracks well. She wasn't going to give up that easily. Zoe reached out to a lawyer and began gathering everything she could. She wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting for the truth, and the truth had to come to light, no matter the cost. A week later, Zoe found something that gave her a sense of hope. She came across an old family album that had been tucked away in a box. In one of the pictures, there was their father, strong, healthy, and full of life, sitting at his desk, writing something. Zoe stared at the photo for a long time. This was the man she remembered, the man who always had a clear sense of right and wrong. There was no way he would have left everything to Emily without a second thought. Zoe knew deep down that her father had always been fair, and if this was truly his will, there would be no question in her mind. This, however, felt like a betrayal, not just by Emily, but by someone who had meant so much to them both. Zoe couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if she didn't fight. If she let Emily take everything, it would be like giving up on everything their father had worked so hard for. But Zoe wasn't going to let that happen. She wasn't going to let Emily's lies steal her future. It was time to take action. No more waiting. Zoe began planning her next move carefully. She wasn't just going to fight this battle for money or property. She was going to fight for her father's legacy. The battle for truth had begun, and Zoe knew she would stop at nothing to uncover the lies that had been buried beneath the surface. But little did she know, the truth was about to hit her in a way she never could have expected. Something was coming, something that would change everything. The DNA test results. Zoe had no idea how much it would alter the entire situation, but it was the twist that would turn her life around and reveal the full extent of Emily's deception. The truth was out there, and Zoe was ready to uncover it no matter what. The next few days felt like an eternity for Zoe. Every phone call, every text, even every moment spent with Emily at the family house seemed suffocating. Emily had no idea what Zoe had discovered, but Zoe could see the subtle signs of nervousness in her sister. Every time they spoke, Emily seemed to be overcompensating, acting overly sweet and pushing for normalcy, as if everything was fine. But Zoe could see through it. Emily wasn't fooling her. In fact, the more Zoe paid attention, the more she realized that her sister was slipping up. Small details kept popping up, things Zoe had never noticed before, like how Emily seemed to know too much about their father's final days, details that only Zoe was privy to. Zoe wasn't sure if it was guilt or just arrogance, but Emily was starting to show cracks in her perfect facade. Zoe felt an urge to confront her. She couldn't keep quiet any longer. She needed answers, and it was clear that Emily wasn't going to offer them willingly. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, and Zoe was growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of clarity. But Zoe knew she had to play this carefully. She couldn't let herself get caught up in the drama or the emotion of it all. This wasn't just about family. It was about justice. So, Zoe turned her focus to the legal aspect of it all. She knew Emily would fight back, but Zoe had a plan. She started documenting every conversation, every moment that felt suspicious. Emily's words, her actions, they were all being noted. Zoe even started recording their phone calls, a tactic she never thought she'd have to resort to, but one that felt necessary. She couldn't trust anyone, not even Emily, anymore. Then one evening, Zoe's phone buzzed with a message from the lawyer. He had some new information, something she had been waiting for. The lawyer had tracked down the old records from their father's estate, and there it was, the smoking gun. A detail Zoe had never known. Emily had made significant changes to their father's will in the months leading up to his death. The will that had been presented was not only forged, it was tampered with, altered in ways that suggested manipulation. Zoe's stomach dropped as she read through the lawyer's notes. Emily had gotten to the lawyer, made changes to the terms of the will, and even ensured that the paperwork was signed in a way that seemed legitimate, but was far from it. The realization hit Zoe like a ton of bricks. Emily had been planning this for a long time. With this new information in hand, Zoe felt the weight of the battle ahead. She couldn't waste any more time. Emily had already manipulated the system, but now Zoe had proof. Zoe wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew she couldn't back down. She had to push forward, no matter how difficult or painful it was. But as Zoe prepared for the next step, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Everything had been moving so fast, and it was almost too easy. There had to be more to this than just a forged will. Zoe knew she was missing something important. And that's when she realized the DNA test. The test she'd arranged as a last resort, something that seemed almost irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, might just hold the key to the entire mystery. Zoe's mind raced as she connected the dots. If Emily was lying about their father's will, was she also lying about something else? Was she even really their father's biological daughter? Zoe couldn't ignore the possibility. The more she thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit. The will might have been forged, but there was a chance that Emily wasn't entitled to any of the inheritance, no matter what the document said. Zoe decided, then and there, that she would go through with the test. The results would reveal everything, once and for all. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was about truth, about clearing her name, and about making sure Emily couldn't get away with this betrayal. The decision was made. Zoe contacted the lab to move forward with the DNA test. She knew that it might change everything, but she was ready. She wasn't going to let her sister's lies destroy her any longer. Zoe's life, her future, depended on what that test would reveal. And deep down, she knew that whatever happened next, it would be the end of this long battle, and the beginning of a new chapter. The days leading up to the DNA test results felt like an unbearable waiting game. Zoe's mind raced with endless possibilities. What if the test didn't show what she hoped? What if Emily had covered all her tracks and the test didn't matter? Zoe couldn't afford to second-guess herself. This was her only chance to uncover the truth. Still, the doubt lingered in the back of her mind. She didn't want to build her hopes up too high, only to have them crushed. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't back down now. The test was a small step in the grand scheme of things, but it was the step that could break Emily's hold on everything. The tension between Zoe and Emily was growing. Emily, blissfully unaware of Zoe's growing suspicion, continued with her daily routine as though nothing was wrong. But Zoe noticed everything now, every conversation, every passing glance. Emily acted like she was in control, that the inheritance was already hers. But Zoe could see the cracks starting to show. Her sister was trying too hard to act normal, as though she didn't have a care in the world. It was as though Emily was trying to convince herself that her lies were going to work. Zoe, on the other hand, had been preparing for what was to come. She had gathered everything she could: documents, text messages, photos, and the forged will. She was ready to confront Emily, to expose the lies. But the moment Zoe had been waiting for arrived sooner than expected. The DNA test results came back. Zoe couldn't open the email fast enough. Her hands trembled as she clicked on the link to view the results. For a moment, it felt like the whole world stopped moving. Her eyes scanned the report, the numbers and details swimming in front of her. And then it hit her. The truth was undeniable. The test confirmed it. Emily wasn't their father's biological daughter. It wasn't just a small error or a misunderstanding. It was the foundation of everything Emily had built her claim on. Emily had no biological claim to the inheritance at all. Zoe sat there, stunned, staring at the screen. She didn't feel a sense of victory, not yet. In fact, she felt an overwhelming sense of disbelief. How had Emily gotten away with this for so long? How had she managed to manipulate everyone around her? Zoe had always suspected something wasn't right, but this revelation confirmed it. The anger, the betrayal. It all came rushing back in waves. Emily had been lying not just about their father's will, but about her very identity. It was as if everything Zoe had known about her sister had been a lie. Zoe didn't know what to do next. Part of her wanted to confront Emily immediately, to throw the truth in her face and watch her sister crumble. But Zoe wasn't that kind of person. She wasn't interested in revenge. She just wanted justice. She needed to process this information carefully to plan her next move. This wasn't just a fight for money or property. It was a fight for her father's legacy and for the truth that had been hidden for so long. Zoe made a decision. She would take this to court. The DNA test results were proof. And with the forged will in hand, she knew she had everything she needed. It wasn't just about what Emily had done. It was about exposing the truth to everyone who had been misled. Zoe wasn't going to let Emily get away with this anymore. As Zoe sat back in her chair, her mind flooded with thoughts of the future. She had already been through so much, but this was the final piece of the puzzle. The next step was to make sure that Emily faced the consequences of her actions. Zoe wasn't going to let her sister walk away with everything, not when the truth was finally out. The battle was just beginning, and Zoe was ready to fight. She didn't need anyone's approval, not anymore. She had the truth on her side, and with that truth, she knew she would win. The decision was made, and Zoe wasted no time. She contacted her lawyer, the one who had been helping her navigate this entire mess. The news about the DNA test results hit him as hard as it had hit her. He had been suspicious of Emily's actions from the beginning, but even he hadn't anticipated this. Now, Zoe had undeniable proof that Emily had been lying about her own identity, which made her claim to the inheritance legally null and void. The lawyer advised Zoe to prepare for the worst. Emily would likely try to fight back, use every excuse in the book, and do whatever she could to keep control of what she believed was rightfully hers. But Zoe had no choice but to move forward. She had to take this to court. The days leading up to the hearing were a blur of frantic preparations. Zoe had all the evidence she needed: copies of the forged will, the text messages where Emily had bragged about her plans, and the DNA test that sealed the deal. But Zoe's mind kept drifting back to her father. All of this, every argument, every legal fight, felt so wrong. Her father had always told her that family came first, that nothing was more important than trust and loyalty. And now, here they were, fighting over his legacy. It didn't seem right, but Zoe knew there was no other option. She had to stand up for what was hers. The day of the hearing arrived, and Zoe felt a strange calmness wash over her. She wasn't nervous. If anything, she was just tired. Tired of fighting, tired of the betrayal, tired of the lies. She just wanted it to be over. When she walked into the courtroom, she could feel the tension in the air. Emily was already there, sitting with her lawyer, her expression cold and defiant. Zoe couldn't help but feel a rush of anger when she saw her. How could Emily sit there, pretending like everything was fine? How could she have the nerve to act like she hadn't just shattered everything they had built as a family? Zoe took a seat and waited as the proceedings began. Emily's lawyer was the first to speak, trying to make a case for why the will should stand as it was. He argued that their father had been clear in his wishes, that the inheritance should go to Emily because she had been the one to care for him during his final years. Zoe clenched her fists at the thought. She had been there for their father every day, not Emily. But Emily's lawyer kept pushing, using every word they could to paint Zoe as a jealous, bitter daughter who was only after money. Zoe's lawyer, however, wasn't having it. He calmly presented the evidence Zoe had gathered, proof of the forged will, screenshots of the manipulative messages Emily had sent, and of course, the DNA test results. He didn't need to say much. The documents spoke for themselves. The judge, who had been quiet up until that point, looked over the papers carefully. There was no denying the truth. Emily had no biological claim to the inheritance, and the will she had presented was nothing more than a forged document, designed to steal what wasn't hers. Emily's face paled as the evidence mounted. Zoe could see her sister's composure start to crack. She was losing control, and it was becoming obvious that her carefully constructed lies were unraveling. Emily's lawyer tried to argue once more, but the judge wasn't having it. He addressed Emily directly, asking her to explain why she had forged their father's will. The silence in the room was deafening as Emily hesitated, her words stumbling as she tried to justify her actions. But it was too late. The truth was already out. Zoe sat back, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't over yet, but the hardest part was done. The judge ruled in her favor, stating that the forged will would be dismissed and Zoe's rightful claim to the inheritance would be honored. The room felt like it was spinning as Zoe processed the decision. It was a victory, yes, but it felt hollow. She hadn't wanted any of this. All she wanted was peace, to honor her father's memory, and to move on with her life. But this battle, this fight for justice, had been necessary. It wasn't just about the money or the property, it was about standing up for what was right. As the courtroom session ended, Zoe walked out, her head held high. She had won, but she didn't feel the victory she had expected. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of closure. Emily would have to deal with the consequences of her actions now, but Zoe was done fighting. The fight for the inheritance had been won, but the emotional cost had been too high. Now, Zoe just wanted to focus on rebuilding her life, her future, and the legacy her father had left behind. And so, Zoe built her life again, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to honor her father's legacy, even if it meant doing so alone. The fight for the truth had cost her more than she could have imagined, but in the end, it had given her something far more valuable, the strength to move forward, to rebuild, and to never let anyone define her worth again. Months passed, and Zoe's life slowly began to take on a rhythm that felt normal again. The business was thriving, her father's estate was finally in order, and the shadow of the legal battle with Emily seemed to fade into the background. But there were still moments when the weight of everything hit her like a wave. Sometimes, when Zoe walked through the doors of the boutique, she would pause, take a deep breath, and remember how this all began. Her father had been the one to plant the seed, the one who had always talked about hard work and integrity. And though he was no longer around to see it, Zoe had made sure his legacy would live on. But despite the growth, there was still a part of Zoe that felt like something was missing. She had reclaimed what was rightfully hers, yes, but there was still the lingering feeling that something had been taken from her that couldn't be replaced. It wasn't the inheritance, the house, or even the business. It was the family she thought she had. The betrayal she'd felt from Emily had been deep, but the quiet emptiness that came after the fight was what really unsettled Zoe. She had always believed that family meant loyalty, but that belief had been shattered. Her father's death had been the end of one chapter, but the fallout from Emily's actions had become an entirely new struggle. Then, one day, Zoe's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something in her gut told her to pick up. It was Emily. Zoe's heart skipped a beat. The last time they had spoken was in court, where Emily had been defeated. She hadn't heard from her sister since then, and Zoe had figured that their relationship was irreparable. "Zoe, it's Emily," came the shaky voice on the other end of the line. "I know you probably hate me, and honestly, I don't blame you. But I wanted to apologize. I need to explain myself." Zoe froze. She hadn't expected this, not at all. For weeks, she had tried to forget about her sister. She had convinced herself that Emily was nothing but a chapter in her past, that she had closed for good. But now, hearing Emily's voice on the phone, Zoe's emotions stirred once again. Anger, hurt, confusion, all tangled together. "I don't know what to say," Zoe replied, her voice steady but guarded. "You've done enough damage already, Emily. I'm not sure there's anything left for us to talk about." "I get that," Emily said quickly, her voice cracking. "But I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know that's too much. But I need to tell you why I did what I did." Zoe hesitated. She had no interest in hearing excuses, no desire to relive the pain that Emily had caused. But something in Emily's voice stopped her from hanging up. Maybe it was the desperation, or maybe it was just that she wasn't ready to fully close the door on their relationship. "Fine," Zoe said reluctantly. "I'm listening." "I was scared," Emily admitted, her voice low. "I've always felt like I wasn't enough. Dad always seemed to love you more, you know. He always trusted you, and I felt like I was the second choice. And when he passed away, I saw an opportunity. I saw the inheritance as a way to finally feel like I mattered, to prove that I wasn't just the other daughter, the one who couldn't get anything right. Zoe's mind raced as Emily spoke. She hadn't expected this kind of honesty. The words were raw, almost painful to hear, but they also gave Zoe some clarity. She had always known that Emily struggled with their father's favoritism, but she had never understood how deeply it had affected her. I thought, if I could just get what I wanted, it would fill the hole inside me, Emily continued, her voice trembling now. But I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. I hurt you. I hurt the family. And I'm so sorry, Zoe. I don't expect anything from you. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed you to know the truth. I didn't know how else to fix what I had done. The silence stretched between them as Zoe processed what Emily had said. The apology was genuine, Zoe could tell. But did it change anything? Did it undo the hurt? Did it somehow make up for the betrayal? The lies? The destruction of their family? I don't know what to say, Zoe finally replied, her voice quieter now. You've broken something that can't be easily fixed. I don't think I'll ever look at you the same way again. But I don't know if I can just walk away completely either. I can't just forget the last few months, or the years before that. Emily's voice softened. I don't expect you to forget. But maybe, just maybe, we can start over. Not as sisters who can go back to the way things were, but as people who've both learned some hard lessons. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I am asking for a chance to rebuild. Not as the same family we were, but as something new, something different. Zoe sat in silence, her emotions swirling. It wasn't forgiveness she was seeking. It was peace. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding a way to heal, even if it meant leaving some things behind. I can't promise anything, Zoe said, finally finding her voice again. But I'm willing to talk. That's all I can offer right now. The conversation ended there, and Zoe sat for a long time, staring at the phone in her hand. She didn't know where this would lead. She didn't know if their relationship could ever be repaired. But she knew one thing for sure. The journey she had been on had changed her, and it had taught her what truly mattered. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that courtroom months ago. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to start something new. Not just with Emily, but with herself. Time moved forward, and while Zoe wasn't sure where her relationship with Emily would go, she felt a shift within herself. The weight of the past was slowly lifting, and she began to focus on what mattered most. The boutique was flourishing more than ever, with new customers, new opportunities, and a new sense of purpose. Zoe had worked hard to get to this point, and now she wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away from her. She had built something from the ground up, and it had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of her resilience and her strength. Still, there were days when Zoe would find herself looking back. She'd catch herself thinking about the woman she used to be, the one who trusted without question, the one who believed in family above all else. She had been forced to grow up quickly, to face realities she had never imagined, and in doing so, she had become someone new. It wasn't just about the inheritance or the victory in court anymore. Zoe had learned something far more valuable. That true strength didn't come from holding on to the past. It came from letting go of what no longer served her. Zoe had accepted that the family she once knew would never be the same. Emily had betrayed her, but Zoe also understood that Emily had her own pain, her own struggles, things Zoe hadn't seen before. The apology was just the beginning, but it wasn't the end. Zoe realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about releasing the hold that anger and resentment had on her heart. She didn't have to let Emily back into her life fully, but she could release the burden of hatred that had weighed her down for so long. It wasn't an easy road, and it wasn't a perfect one. There were still moments when Zoe would feel the sting of the past, when she'd see a memory flash before her eyes and feel that familiar ache. But she had learned to embrace those moments, to acknowledge them without letting them control her. Life was about moving forward, and Zoe was ready for what came next. Then, one evening, as Zoe was locking up the boutique after a long day, she saw a familiar face standing outside. It was Emily. She stood there, hesitant, as though unsure whether to come in or not. For a moment, Zoe froze, but then something shifted within her. She didn't feel the old anger or resentment that once would have surged to the surface. Instead, she felt a quiet calm. "Zoe," Emily said softly, stepping closer. "I know this might be the last thing you want right now, but I needed to see you. I needed to tell you. I've been working on myself. I've been getting therapy, and I'm trying to be better. I know I've hurt you beyond measure, and I can't change that. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." Zoe took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future held for her and Emily. But in that moment, she realized that perhaps this was the beginning of something new, not just for their relationship, but for herself as well. Maybe this was the start of healing. "I don't know where this will go, Emily," Zoe said quietly, meeting her sister's eyes for the first time without anger. "But I'm willing to try. Not to fix everything, because I don't think that's possible. But maybe we can build something from here. Something real. Something that honors the truth, no matter how painful it was to get here." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't expect anything from you. I just want to make things right. For myself, for you, for Dad. I don't want to carry this guilt anymore." Zoe nodded slowly, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She didn't know what the future held for her and Emily, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. The past had been painful, but it had also shown Zoe just how strong she was. And now, she was ready to face whatever came next, not with fear or bitterness, but with the understanding that sometimes the best way to heal is to open your heart, even just a little. As they stood there in the quiet of the boutique, Zoe realized that her father's legacy wasn't just about money or property. It was about love and loyalty and the strength to move forward in the face of hardship. She didn't need to have all the answers, and she didn't need everything to be perfect. But she had learned that sometimes the greatest victories are the ones that take place in your heart. And as Zoe turned off the lights, locking the door behind her, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. For the first time in a while, she felt like she was ready to embrace whatever the future held, because the truth had set her free, and now she was living her life, not defined by the past, but by the woman she had become.